Welcome to JackSeatGaming, a show where I will attempt to document my personal journey through gaming and share my notes with the internet. My name is Jack, welcome to the shit show. Warning, the following video contains spoilers for Metroid Samus Returns. Also, keep in mind that this is my opinion only, so if you agree or disagree, I encourage you to leave your thoughts in the comment section below. I am not a Metroid fan. I've never been attracted to this franchise at all. I didn't grow up playing the NES or SNES like a lot of you. I grew up playing the Nintendo 64, so my first exposure to Samus and Metroid was through the Smash franchise. I did finish Metroid Prime Hunters on the original DS, but as far as I understand, the Prime lore doesn't necessarily impact the general Metroid lore, and I don't even know where the Hunters lore stands with the rest of the Prime lore, so I won't even be comparing my experiences with that game to this one. I did attempt to play Prime 1, but I was put off by the first person view. I only finished Hunters because it was the only decent game I owned for the Nintendo DS for a while. I do remember trying to play the original Metroid on the Virtual Console for my Wii, but I didn't exactly know what to do and gave up immediately. As I said, Metroid's gameplay has never been my cup of tea. The point I'm trying to make is, this is my first full take on a 2D Metroid. Samus Returns for 3DS is a remake of Metroid 2 Return of Samus for the Game Boy. The game was developed by Mercury Steam, a Spain-based developer. They've previously worked for Konami with Lords of Shadow games, a sort of reboot for the Castlevania franchise, which have all received mixed receptions from critics and fans alike. The game's producer, Yoshio Sakamoto, was approached by Mercury Steam to collaborate on a Metroid game, and Sakamoto was aware of the demand for 2D Metroid games. Originally, Mercury Steam wanted to remake Metroid Fusion, however they settled for Metroid 2 instead. The last release of a 2D Metroid game was Zero Mission, a remake of the original NES title, which was released back in 2004. Nintendo's Takehiko Hosokawa and Mercury Steam Jose Luis Marquez were both tasked in directing and retelling Metroid 2's story. Sakamoto has ample experience with the Metroid franchise, as he was co-director and co-creator for the original Metroid. He also directed and wrote for Fusion, Zero Mission, and Other M. Sakamoto was actually not involved with the original Metroid 2 for Game Boy at all, but he is more than familiar with the franchise and its universe, so he chose to re-envision Return of Samus. Metroid 2 contains something that is really important to the Metroid franchise. We really wanted to revisit that crucial story point on the Metroid timeline, and of course Metroid 2 is a bit of an older game, so with the increased technology we have, we thought there are a lot of new things we could bring to it. Even the title change reflects how in essence this is the same story, only told with modern narrative and gameplay mechanics. I will assume that you have played this game or at least are acquainted with its story, mainly since 1, its finale is shown in a small cutscene and its plot is summarized in the intro sequence of Super Metroid, a quintessential game for any gamer, and if you're like me, a quintessential game that you haven't even played. 2. The plot and finale for this game heavily impacts the plot of other titles and is referenced multiple times throughout the series. And 3. It's a remake of a game that came out in 1991. Metroid 2 belongs to that lovely part of gaming history I humbly like to call how the fuck are sequels made? It comes right after blockbuster industry-saving games, and right before everyone hates this, how about we do what everyone loved from the first one? So in the end, these sequels end up being remembered as black sheeps of the franchise that try to do something different from the rest, while devs usually recreate what the first ones achieved. As a personal note, the middle kid is usually my favorite for every franchise. Call me a hipster, but I like these differences. I feel it sets them apart and makes them have their own distinct flavor. Metroid 2 brought elements that heavily impacted Metroid from this point on. Thanks to the lack of graphical power on the Game Boys, Samus's iconic Varia suit was born. In the first game, the Varia suit was just a sprite recolor, but since Metroid 2 didn't have color, the devs thought of demonstrating growth by physically altering the sprite, and thus, the badass shoulder armor version was born. Metroid 2 also elaborated on the Metroid's lore themselves, giving them an evolutionary line and expanded on Samus's relationship with them. It also introduced a lot of recurring elements and weapons for the first time in the franchise. Proper saving, the spacer or wide beam, the plasma beam, the space jump, the spring ball, and the spider ball, all of which have returned in some way or another to future entries of the franchise. And while it could be argued that Metroid 2 hosts one of the most basic storylines, the rest of Metroid wouldn't exist without its foundations, lore-wise or mechanics-wise. After her first encounter with the aliens and narrowly surviving, Lieutenant Ellen Ripley is tasked by the Corporation Weyland-Yutani to travel to planet LV-426 to commit genocide on the alien species who pose a threat to the entire universe. Ripley will be fighting against the aliens in their evolutionary stages, including a dramatic standoff against the Alien Queen and rescuing the last survivor at LV-426. Not only that, but after this entry, Ripley will take a strange mother-like relationship with the aliens and possess a fraction of alien DNA in the future, which may or may not prove useful in future entries of the franchise. Now, alien references aside, the plot of Samus Returns puts you on SR-388, the Metroid home planet, on a mission to destroy every Metroid living there. That's it. Once you've killed enough Metroids, you can progress to the next area, and the only reason you'd be going back is to get all the secrets after getting new upgrades. This game would not fall into what we would now classify as a Metroidvania structure. Metroidvanias are characterized by having zones locked out for abilities, while Samus Returns, like the original, locks away its zones through Metroid kills. During your hunt, there are these husks thrown about SR-388, indicating a Metroid is nearby. It is a linear experience, but it does attempt to work around it, mainly because I would go back to every area after every power-up. The game also includes convenient teleport stations, at least 2 or 3 per area, making backtracking easier, which may incentivize going back to other areas. But that is up to each player to assess, in my opinion. My opinions may contradict with the hardcore Metroid fans, but this being my first 2D Metroid game, I'll try to explain my points thoroughly. First of all, the shooting and the moving. It feels so good to control Samus in this game. Samus Returns feels extremely fluid. I felt like I was always in control of Samus's movement. Mercury's Theme and Sakamoto strive to keep the same core gameplay. However, Mercury's Theme incorporated a melee counter for this game, inherited from Mirror of Fate. 4 Aeon abilities were also added to the game. Each one is assigned to a button on the direction pad, and by pressing A you can use whichever is active. I don't know how I feel about the counter, to be honest. At first, it felt comfortable and innovative, but after the first few hours, I grew tired of enemies whose main weakness was the counter until Samus's beam was upgraded to a point for it to be useful. At times it felt like the counter would do more damage than a few shots, not to mention the fact that enemies would be stunned after a successful parry, and enemies would drop more Aeon than if shot normally. It gave the game an unusual stop and go rhythm where the enemies control the pace of the battle. I was very grateful every time my beeps were upgraded because of this. At some points of the game, I found myself grinding for Aeon using the counter, so even if I could dispatch enemies quickly with my powered up beam, I was forced to use the counter if I didn't want to backtrack. For the most part, the parry attacks were easily telegraphed, so there wasn't a lot of challenge to pull them up successfully. There is a visual and audio cue when something is able to be parried. For me, this created a love-hate relationship with the system. I did enjoy how this made the enemies more aggressive though. Enemies did not just float about. This time around, they directly charged at you. However, I will admit that the melee counter during some of the boss fights was absolutely satisfying. At first, when the counter was first revealed, I was very skeptical, as I am not a fan of quick time events and feared the game would be dominated by this. But to my surprise, once you execute a counter on the boss, you are in control during these cinematic sequences. You could change to super missiles in the middle of the sequence and you really felt the "yeah, fuck you" while pummeling the enemy. If you don't shoot during the sequence, you don't shoot. There isn't any arbitrary button mashing, just your normal missile buttons and the touchscreen if you want to change weapons. Now regarding the Aeon abilities, all 4 abilities share the same magic meter, sort of how Magic and Ocarina of Time all share the same magic meter. First, Lightning Armor grants Samus an extra layer of protection. She takes less damage and while not extremely necessary, it can make hazard-ridden passages easier to navigate. It also gives her a stronger melee counter, but I didn't find myself using it too often as it would consume a lot of my Aeon. Second, Beam Burst gives Samus a scattershot ability for her normal beam shots, dealing massive damage. However, this one doesn't stack with the Ice Beam, so you're stuck with the main beam for this one. By the point you get it, it becomes extra useful. It does use up your Aeon meter fast, but defeated enemies will usually reward you with almost as much Aeon as you ended up using in the first place. I found myself using this one the most. It made backtracking a breeze and it made sturdier enemies easier to deal with without having to use the counter. Third, the Phase Drift. This one was extremely situational. It was only necessary for no more than a dozen times in the game and was used exclusively for platforming. The Phase Drift, in my opinion, was the most disappointing. I would have hoped to see enemies or even a boss that were required to use this skill. I mean, you could have used it for some of the bosses, but I ended up choosing to use Lightning Armor for extra defense or Beam Burst for extra damage instead. It only proved effective during the last phase of the Diggernaut boss fight, but it wasn't that completely necessary by any standard. You could get by the boss without having to use it. And lastly, the Scan Pulse ability. The Scan Pulse ability is dividing critics and fans of this game, so I want to elaborate. The Scan Pulse operates like a sonar that reveals the map in your vicinity. It also detects upgrades and hidden passageways, and tells you what walls you can interact with. I can understand why veterans can see how this feature may ruin the immersion of exploring, but as a first time player of the franchise, it felt comfortable. It made the game friendly to play and its world easy to navigate. You also have the option of not using the Scan Pulse at all, so if you don't like the feature, you can completely ignore it. It made me, a newbie to the franchise, understand the rule set for finding secrets. The map also includes a lot of cool features that make SR-388 easier to navigate. You can drop these little guitar picks to help you mark anything of note. There's a variety of colors to choose from, so you can mark everything down if you want to backtrack. It also conveniently highlights acid-filled rooms in purple and rooms in red that can only be bypassed until you can withstand the heat. and the actual door has a neat effect of showcasing that as well. From what I understand, these are the main gameplay mechanic changes made from 2D Metroid games in general. High jump and space jump are back, missiles and super missiles are here, morph ball, spider bomb, bombs, and power bombs are back as usual, as well as the grapple beam. The game also includes the Varisuit and the gravity suit upgrades. Something that was sadly missing was a speed booster. I've never played a game where it is used, and it looks so satisfying to pull up in speedruns. I guess the phase drift sort of works like an inverted shine spark, but it doesn't look nearly as satisfying. The 2 Smash amiibo and the Samus amiibo for this game give you reserve tanks for energy and missiles, while the Metroid amiibo makes a permanent marker where you can find Metroids when you're out hunting for them. I did find out that if you have found at least one Metroid in the area, you can bring it back to the gateway and one of the next Metroids will be then pointed out on your map, similarly to the amiibo function, so that function is included in-game, which means that you can get by entirely without using the Metroid amiibo. However, one of my main complaints with this game involves the amiibo themselves. Once you've defeated the game at least once, the amiibo will also unlock the sound test, a gallery, and a fusion mode. The game already includes its own version of hard mode, starting from your second playthrough. Fusion mode is a harder version of hard mode, and Samus gets to work her fusion suit for it. I dislike the amiibo concept in general when stocking away valuable gameplay add-ins that are already included in the game. I'd be more than okay if it was average DLC, but having to buy a physical item for the content makes me hate amiibo more and more every time a game locks away content like this. I 100%ed the game in 13 hours or so. The last hour and a half was spent backtracking to get everything hidden about SR388. I wish it could have been a tad longer, but all things considered, it is a game based on a Game Boy game that is 26 years old, so 13 hours felt just about enough to satisfy my first experience with 2D Metroid. Samus Returns is an excellent retelling of the original, with some added nods to the franchise and a post-final boss sequence worthy of Nintendo Hall of Fame. This game is friendly and accessible to newcomers. Having the ability to scope the area makes the game very welcoming to new players, and veterans have the option of not using it so they can STF you. This important part of Metroid lore is easy to digest, and not only that, it does so without a single word or line of text from the game after the intro. It is an admirable task. Even if the story is simple enough to summarize in a single short paragraph, I didn't need to be told to feel tense or scared. I felt the risks at stake and the pressure of fulfilling Samus' mission. Not only that, but the game includes one image for every zone detailing the history of the Chozo in SR388 if you reach 100% in each zone individually, and an extra one if you have unlocked and seen all Chozo memories. These Chozo memories are also visual only, so will take some observation and attention to grasp its meaning. This is completely new content to the story, so I've chosen not to spoil it so you can find out for yourself. This game is easy to pick up and hard to master. Having such fluid and responsive gameplay, every death felt like my own fault. It never felt unfair, and I automatically knew why I was screwing up and how it could improve. All enemies in general made great damage to Samus, and the game suffered from early hell. I felt like throughout the first half of the game I was getting very few energy tanks, so from the very beginning the game teaches you not to run headfirst into combat, but to think about your surroundings, analyze the situation, and plan accordingly for each encounter. This game has Nintendo Hard branded all around it. The game is hard, and it was a good thing. I felt tense. I felt like my shoulder buttons were about to break from my poor old 3DS anytime I had to spider-ball my way through bosses or make precision jumps to avoid boss attacks. The game is also very forgiving with boss battle, as it auto-saves right before the boss battle, so hit and continue doesn't make you backtrack entirely. One thing I will admit is that the later boss's damage is more than it needs to be. The final 2 bosses and the late stage Metroids were killing me in 1 or 2 blows, and I had all upgrades available to me at that point of the game. Now that I've mentioned bosses, I found myself disappointed in the lack of variety. While I do understand the argument of fighting 40 Metroids and how you're supposed to feel more and more powerful with how easily you can defeat them, in my opinion it just felt tedious. The only time it felt satisfying was during the last stretch of the road before the Queen's Lair, where you encounter basic Metroids once again and clear them in just a few shots. There are also a few times when a Gamma Metroid is close to dying that it chooses to change arenas, and it doesn't make the fight any harder, it's just artificially making the fight feel longer. The only new boss battle was Diggernaut, the colossal mining robot teased in the trailers for this game. That boss battle is executed flawlessly. It is incredibly hard and really tests how precisely you can control Samus, not to mention the fact that there were some puzzle elements to the fight that made it so memorable and satisfying. While Diggernaut is an excellent portrayal of what a Metroid boss can be, I felt let down getting so close to the endgame and realizing I had only fought Diggernaut and Arachnis. Mechanics wise, I think the game could have done a better job at explaining how and where certain abilities could be used. This could be very subjective, but it wasn't until my second playthrough that I realized you could grapple pull Metroid Zetas from the ceiling, making the battle a lot easier if I had known, or how Gamma and Alpha Metroids freeze up when shot with the Ice Beam. Another mechanic that I had to look for and ask on Reddit was how to get by the red crystals. At no point does the game create a set piece that teaches you this mechanic like it very clearly does for other power-ups in the game. I usually pay a lot of attention to a game soundtrack, but this one didn't really stand out. And I was only familiar with the surface theme of SR388, and even then it was heard only very briefly in the opening moments of the game. I do understand that this game includes songs from other entries of the franchise, but not having played them brings no nostalgia for me, so sorry about the lack of discussion regarding the soundtrack. Maybe after playing other Metroid games, I'll be able to revisit this game's soundtrack. Although it sounds like I've given this game quite a bit of flack, my final impressions of Samus Returns are great. This is a great remake and a great game in general, and I highly recommend this game to new Metroid players. However, I will advise to get ready for its difficulty if you're not familiar with the franchise. Samus Returns brings new life to an integral part of Metroid's lore, making it friendly and easy to understand, building up on the existing one, and tying up with possible new entries and old ones alike. Hopefully remakes like Samus Returns will make devs at Nintendo listen to their audiences and release high quality content that is both appealing for the creators and the fan base alike. In the meantime, I guess I'll have to play Zero Mission, Fusion, and Super Metroid while we all wait for Prime 4 and whatever else comes our way. Thank you Samus Returns, you've just created a new Metroid fan. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends to support future content. You can also leave your suggestions in the comments for what game I should play next. Is there any other Metroid game I should play after this one? This has been JackSeatGaming, see you next time.